Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about teaching a Bible class. I'm going to do my best. There's a number of people I think are probably not feeling well today. You can hear it in the voice, you can hear it in my voice. First words out of Rob's mouth this morning, I thought, he's not feeling so good either. Might have heard that in Jeff's voice, but that has more to do with the Alabama football game than physical illness. Sorry about that. I guess we didn't give you a hard enough time in Bible class this morning about that. But I want to spend a little time this morning just talking about teaching the Bible class. I'm going to emphasize, though this could apply to many other scenarios, parents teaching a Bible class to your children around the dining table, having a Bible class in your home with your friends or neighbors or co-workers. But I'm going to emphasize, though we can apply it to other scenarios, I am going to emphasize what we did here in our Sunday morning Bible class with the different kids of various ages on Sunday mornings and on Wednesday evenings. That's going to be our particular emphasis. Now, Brandon read for us in Ephesians chapter 4. He started in verse 11 and read quite a ways after this, but there's something I want to point out in this text regarding the role of teachers. That teachers play a critical role in the development of the body of Christ. It says that he gave some as apostles and some as prophets, some as evangelists and some as pastors and teachers for the equipment of the saints, for the work of service, to the building up of the body of Christ. If we are to build up and grow and cultivate spiritually this body of Christians, adequate, competent, capable teachers are going to play an important and critical role in accomplishing this. So this is a very serious task to be considered this morning. I'm going to begin by considering a step that I think many people neglect, not just in the teaching process, but perhaps in life in general, and that's prayer. And that's prayer. When we're talking about teaching and preparing to teach a Bible class, whether it's young kids or teenagers, I think prayer is a critical step. Now, we should certainly pray during class. If we want to set a good example to our students, to the children, we should pray during class and get them involved in this. And sometimes for the little kids, we get some funny answers. You ask them, what should we pray for? And I had a little kid once say, pray that mommy will spank my little brother. You'll get some funny answers, but, with the children, you want to get them involved, and so praying in class is important. But I think more than that, we should emphasize prayer before and after as a teacher. And I think more in the private sense of prayer. So we should pray before class even begins as a teacher. We want to get ourselves in the right mindset. We want to be focused on what we're doing. And we want to have some respect for the gravity of the task of being a teacher. That the words we say to these young and impressionable minds are critical, are important. They matter. And so we want to be aware of what we're saying. We want God to be there with us. I'm going to give you an example. Go to Nehemiah chapter 2. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Though there are many other scriptures we could look at, I think Nehemiah is a good example of this. Nehemiah chapter 2. Now, King Artaxerxes sees that Nehemiah has kind of a sour expression on his face and says, well, what's going on? In Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 2, the king said to me, why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid, says Nehemiah, because he couldn't hide. He couldn't hide his sorrow for the sad condition of Jerusalem, how the walls are still down, the temple is still in shambles, and the people of God are just in really poor condition. He can't hide his sorrow for that. Verse 3, and I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad? For the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies desolate, and its gates have been consumed by fire. Then the king said to me, what would you request? Now notice here at the end of verse 4. So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king and your servant has found favor before you, send me to Judah. He says, let me go and fix this. Did you catch that in verse 4, though? The way this reads to me is he doesn't say, hold on, I'm going to go away and think about this before I give you my answer. No, it says he prayed to the God of heaven, and then he answered the king. This was a quick prayer, as I understand this text. Prayers don't have to be long. They can be short, and that's all the time we have. But the point here for Nehemiah is he understood the next words that came out of his mouth would be very important. And so he wanted God's help. And so we teach young children, we teach children about the Bible. Shouldn't we begin personally or privately before class even starts with a similar prayer? God, I know the words I'm about to speak are going to be very important. They will have an impact. They could have an impact on these children's lives for years to come, and perhaps even eternal ramifications. The words I'm about to say are very important. Please help me. Please be with me. Let's begin before class even starts with a prayer. I think that's very important. Prayer should go throughout. In fact, God encouraged us to ask for wisdom. James chapter 1 and verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask God. Now, I don't think this is saying that if you fail to prepare, you can ask God just moments before class starts and He'll give you some of the knowledge that you failed to study for. This isn't your bailout if you fail to prepare, but nonetheless, God encourages us to ask Him. Part of this, I think, is doing our diligence in studying, but I think part of this answer in James chapter 1 and verse 5 is also in prayer. Let's seek wisdom from God and ask for His help. Let's turn to Him. And that's very important. So we should pray during class, maybe at the beginning, at the end of class, and lead by example and show the children how to pray and get them involved in that process. But let's certainly pray before class to prepare ourselves. And let's do a follow-up prayer after we're done teaching as well. And I'll get a little bit personal here. This is kind of what my Monday morning prayer is usually like. I pray that the seeds I've sown will take root, will grow and produce fruit and bring glory to you. We need to have the humility to recognize and acknowledge our role in this process. We are simply the instrument used to present the gospel, but the power to save and the power to transform and change lives remains with God and remains with His Word. Romans chapter 1 and verse 16 says, it is the power of God unto salvation. And so we need to be humble enough to acknowledge that. Now in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, I love the humility of Paul here. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, he says, who am I? I am nobody. Apollos is nobody. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, beginning in verse 5, what then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, even as the Lord gave opportunity to each one. He says that's all we are. We're just servants of God. We preach the gospel, and we're glad we had opportunity to teach it to you. He says in verse 6, I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. So that neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but God who causes the growth. So let's have some follow-up prayer to our studies as well. Father, I hope what I said here was a reflection of your truth and your wisdom in the Bible. We should pray that as these students, as these children, whether they're our own children or not, as parents, let's pray that as they face the challenges, trials, and temptations of this week, at school, with their friends, at all kinds of environments, what's on TV, what's on the computer, that as they face these temptations and trials, that the lessons they were taught in the Bible will stick, that they will have heard them, that these seeds planted in their heart will take root and transform and change their lives. Let's say that prayer. Father, I planted, I watered, but it's in your hands to cause the growth. And I pray that growth will take place. So let's prepare ourselves with prayer, and let's follow up with prayer. Sometimes a neglected step in life, and certainly I think a neglected step as we prepare to teach a Bible class. Now that being said, there's no excuse for failing to prepare and studying what you are teaching. So we need to know our material. If you're going to teach a Bible class, you need to know your material. So singling out one church or denomination, but I'm going off of some of my own personal experiences. As a teenager, talking with some of my friends who are Christians also, but much different churches or denominations. I spend a lot of time at coffee shops, surprise, surprise, and from time to time I meet and have good conversations with other so-called youth ministers or youth pastors, and I like to ask them what they do at their church, and I'm mostly curious about it. And So this is what this is based off of. We're not attacking one denomination or church or another, but what I see from my own experience is that many churches are taking the youth group approach to teaching the younger generation. What I mean by this is it's an emphasis on fun activities and friendships over Bible study. I just referenced, I didn't read directly, but Romans chapter 1 and verse 16, Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel. Where is the power of God unto salvation? I wonder if perhaps some of these churches are ashamed of the gospel. I kind of feel like they're sneaking in the back door, that if we provide fun activities for kids, and maybe sprinkle a little Bible in there for their benefit, it'll somehow help them. It kind of reminds me of those sneaky moms who, make a chocolate cake and then tell you later, did you like it? I put zucchini and carrots in it, and you didn't even know it. That's kind of what I feel like with some of these, youth group approaches. That we're going to have fun and do activities and get together for fun things and maybe sprinkle a little Bible in there too. I kind of feel like, are you ashamed of the gospel? Bottom line, let's turn to Psalm 119. If we want our kids, if we want our children to be wise beyond their years, if we want them to avoid sin, if we want them to live pure lives, then what they need is the Bible. They don't need to be bought another pizza. They need the Bible. That's what they need to prepare to face the challenges of life. Psalm 119 and verse 9. How can a young man keep his way pure? By keeping it according to thy word. That's what will steer a young man or a young woman away from trouble. Verse 11 of Psalm 119. Thy word I have treasured in my heart, that I may not sin against thee. Similarly, verse 99. I have more insight than all my teachers, for thy testimonies are my meditation. I'll stop and say something here. I think that getting together for fun, I think that being good friends outside of Sunday, I think recreational environments to build strong friendships among Christians, I think that can be a good thing. In fact, Acts chapter 2 and verse 46, I can even show you that's what Christians did in the first century. Acts chapter 2 and verse 46. It tells us in Acts chapter 2 verse 46 that day by day, continuing with one mind in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, and taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart. What I gather from this verse is that they valued one another outside of just Sunday. They like spending time with each other. And so that can be a good thing, to spend time, even in a recreational environment, to just get together, watch a game, watch a movie, play some games. That can be an okay thing to do. That can be a very helpful thing. But if we're failing to teach the Bible, if that's not our emphasis, I think we are missing the point. And that's really what I want to get across here in this idea here. The Bible is what we need to emphasize. And what that means is you need to be a student of the Bible. The Bible is what our kids need more than anything else. Good friendships, strong friendships, that's a good thing. But the Bible is what they need. It is the power of God unto salvation. And so this is what we need to teach. Our goal as a teacher isn't merely to entertain the kids for 45 minutes. Our goal is to teach them the Bible. And this requires that we are personally students. We are disciples of Christ ourselves first. We need to know the Bible. We're going to teach it to others because that's our goal. That's our emphasis. So make full use of the material provided. Ever since I've been here, I think, we've had several people order the curriculum, the workbooks. I think they've all done excellent jobs. All the different people who have done that. So make full use of the material that's ordered and provided. There's good ideas in there. But also be aware, this doesn't get you off the hook from knowing the material, from knowing the Bible text you are studying on a personal level. You need to know. You need to be personally knowledgeable of the text or topic which you are teaching. The Bible study workbooks that we use are almost always very accurate. But they're not inspired from God. They could have mistakes. In fact, in times past, I've taught classes where I picked some material and thought, this is excellent, 90% of it at least. 10% of it, I look at it and think, it's not quite right, I'm going to scratch this out. The rest is great, but you've got to be able to discern truth from error. Use what's provided, use the tools that we have and the resources. But don't let that become an excuse for studying yourself, from knowing what you're teaching. And sometimes, the material doesn't have all the scriptures it should. And like I said, our emphasis is teaching the Bible. So when the material we're provided with doesn't have no scriptures, find some relevant scriptures to the lesson you're teaching and add them. And within reason, I'm going to encourage you as teachers as well to make a change here or there. What I mean is, if you're handed the material for the teaching quarter, don't just look at it and say, nah, I'm going to do something different. Stay within the bounds, because a lot of times what you're teaching this quarter is building off of what was taught in the previous quarter. So stay within the bounds of what's suggested in the material, but if you want to go a little different direction, if it says, here's the text for the day, here's what we're studying, and the material is the material. At the end of the day, the bottom line is the teacher, you must be prepared. What I mean is, more than casually reading the lesson plan on Saturday night. You owe these kids more than that. You owe God more than that as teacher. Do a little more work than that. Be prepared. Think about what questions your students might ask you. How are you going to answer them? You might not anticipate every question. In fact, when it comes to kids, you're rarely going to anticipate half the questions they might even ask you. But try to think ahead. What might they ask, and how would I answer them? What questions would you ask your kids, especially when you go from children more, into the teenage years? It becomes critical to think and plan, what kind of questions am I going to ask them? More than just a yes or no answer type question. I want them thinking about this. So you got to do some thought and preparation. It's helpful to have your lesson made out as far in advance as possible. You know what? Things come up. Vacations happen. People get sick. There are going to be times when you're just not able to make it as a teacher. The more prepared you are in advance, the easier it is to transition someone else to fill in for you on Sunday when you're not there on Wednesday. So the more prepared ahead of time you are, the better. And before we move on to our last point, I'm just going to make this this observation one more time. I do this all the time, but seriously, if you're teaching, work on recruiting a co-teacher. For one, it's helpful if you can't make it because you're sick, something comes up at work, whatever, you've got a ready-made substitute. But for two, find someone that doesn't have a lot of experience teaching. Let them sit in with you and watch and learn and help them become a capable and competent teacher. Or if you don't have a lot of experience teaching Bible classes, maybe look on the list out there in the foyer, find somebody who signed up to teach next quarter, and maybe ask them, mind if I sit in with you and kind of help and co-teach? I guarantee you, especially as the ages get younger in the classroom, they're not going to turn their nose up at a helper when it comes to teaching young kids. So I encourage you, if you have experience, try to encourage, try to go and find, recruit a co-teacher. If you don't have much experience, try to do something new, push yourself a little bit, and get with someone who can help you teach. So we need to know our material. As a teacher, that should be obvious. You should know the material, the subject, the topic that you are teaching. But the important question is, how am I going to teach this? And that means you need to know your class. You need to know your material. You have to know what you're going to teach. But then, how do I teach this? How do I present this? And there are several factors to consider. So as we wrap up this lesson, I just want to give you a few considerations, and the first of which is age. Age is a huge factor in determining how to teach. How I teach this, how I present this, really depends on to whom I'm teaching. In Hebrews chapter 5, let's go to Hebrews chapter 5. This analogy that we're all somewhat familiar with reminds us of the truth that at different ages of life, we have different requirements. We have different needs. An adult and a child have different needs in their classes. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 11. Concerning him, we have much to say. It is hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, so there's a certain expectation of where they ought to be by now. It says, by this time you ought to be teachers. You have need again for someone to teach you the elementary principles of the oracles of God. You have come to need milk and not solid food. He used this illustration of milk and solid food. He says you need to be taught the elementary things, the first principles, the foundational things. That's milk. And so when you're teaching a younger children's class, you need to understand that's where you're at. Elementary things, foundational. It's milk. What you're trying to do is impress upon them some of the simplest truths of the Bible. You're more focused on teaching foundational principles, yet as you get to older age groups, your emphasis starts to change. With teenagers especially, your emphasis now is on stimulating their critical thinking skills, helping to guide them as they begin to grasp the message of the gospel for themselves. They're on to some of the solid food. But they first have to have some elementary things established. Some basic truths need to be taught. So we need to understand, in the remaining points I make this morning, just keep that in mind that depending on which age you are teaching, well, your tactics might change based upon what you're trying to accomplish. So we need to consider the age, but also proper use of examples can really make a difference in how effective your teaching is. Jesus and the apostles used real-life examples to help their students relate to what they were teaching. And we need to do the same. And I want to tell you what, when it comes to teaching teenagers, I taught high schoolers last year, and trying to relate to them, trying to use some example they can relate to, it'll make you feel really old really fast. You remember that movie? And they said, no. Feel old. But using examples can help students relate to the text in a more personal way. Let me show you a few examples. In John chapter 13, we find Jesus, very hands-on teaching, if you will, in a very literal sense. He kneels down in John chapter 13 and begins to wash his disciples' feet. John chapter 13 and verse 4, it says, he rose from supper, laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself about. He poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. And they didn't really understand what he was doing. In verse 12, Jesus says to them, do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet, for I gave you an example that you should do as I did to you. This being taught to a group of men that were always arguing about which one was the greatest among them. Jesus used an example, a very hands-on approach to teaching, a very real example. And other times, like in Matthew chapter 18, again, when they were arguing about this, what does Jesus do in Matthew chapter 18, the first 4 verses? He gets a little child and brings him right in front and says, you got to become like this child. He looked at a child and said, here, this is your illustration. This is your example to look to. He used a real-world example. In Mark chapter 4, there is some debate about this. I'll admit it's unclear, but there is some suggestion that in Mark chapter 4, the parable of the sower and the seed, in verse 3, listen to this, behold, the sower went out to sow. It might well be that there was actually a farmer out there sowing seeds in the field. That word behold means to look upon. It can mean metaphorically, but most of the time I think it means literally. So there's some people that believe, and this very well could be true, that Jesus simply saw a farmer out there and said, here's a good chance to make a point. Look at this farmer, behold. If not, he really wanted them to think about one in their mind's eye. Imagine this. Behold in your mind as if you really were. He's trying to use a real-world example. In Mark chapter 11, kind of an odd story, but they come across a fig tree that bears no fruit, so Jesus cursed it. A few days later, they come back, and it's wilting over and dying. He used a real-life example to prove a point to them. Mark chapter 12, verse 41. Jesus sees a widow putting her 2 coins. And he makes a point about how her sacrifice was greater because it cost her more than anything else. More than other people's sacrifice who put in more money than she did. He saw a real thing happening and thought, I'm going to make a point here. In Acts chapter 17, I think this is great. Acts chapter 17 and verse 23. Paul is in Athens. And it says the Spirit is provoked within him. In verse 23, he says, for while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. But therefore you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. Paul saw an idol to an unknown God and thought, I can make a point with this. And in verse 28, for in him we live and move and exist, as even some of your own poets have said, for we also are his offspring. Paul used a reference, a real-world example from their own poets that they could relate to. They understood that to make his point. So whether it's children or teenagers, try to use examples that will help them understand. Try to use real-world examples that they can relate to. And use lots of examples the way Jesus did. Similarly, like Jesus, asking the right questions will encourage your students. It's important to ask questions for young children, but I think this is more important and more critical step when it comes to teenagers. Asking them the right questions. Lots of examples. Luke chapter 10, verse 26. Jesus, this was a favorite method of Jesus, to ask a question to teach. Luke chapter 10, and notice verse 26. Luke chapter 10, verse 26. And he said to them, what is written in the law? How does it read to you? Well, teacher, what's the most important thing in the law? Okay, how does it read to you? And some of these other examples in Matthew, they came to him with a question. He said, well, I'm going to ask you a question also. Jesus was trying to get them to do the thinking. When it comes to kids, when it comes to children, a lot of what you're doing is you're teaching. You're telling them things, and they're listening. And you're trying to get them to remember things. A lot of that involves repetition. But when it comes to teenagers, they're at an age where they're starting to think for themselves. They're starting to make decisions about their own life. And so it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different of a task when it comes to teaching older kids. You want to get them thinking for themselves. You want to get them engaged mentally and think about the most important text they'll ever read. One of my favorite Bible class teachers that I can remember when I was a teenager, his name was Shannon Fleiderer. And whenever he would ask a question, by the way, when a teacher answers their own questions, teachers are afraid of silence. You ask a question, and if it gets silent for too long, you answer it yourself. When a class learns that a teacher will answer his own questions, they'll sit back quietly and let that happen. Shannon Fleiderer was different. When he'd ask a question, he'd raise his eyebrow in anticipation. The silence was killing me. I sit there in my mind thinking, well, he's going to answer. He's not answering. He's just looking at me. Oh, okay. I got to give an answer now. He's not going to say anything until I give an answer. And so don't be afraid of a little bit of silence. Maybe rephrase your question if it didn't come out the right way, but don't answer your own question. You have to ask the right questions. You have to mentally engage your students and let them start to think through these things. Don't be afraid of a little bit of silence. Similar to examples is the idea of illustrations. Again, the idea is to help your student gain a deeper level of understanding. Jesus could have made a statement like this: God loves you, and even if you sin, if you repent, he'll take you back. That is truthful, right? But it lacks conviction. Jesus could have said it that way, but instead, in Luke chapter 15, he tells a story about an impatient child who says to his father, give me what's mine. I want all my inheritance now, and I'm going to go do things my way. Ouch. That probably hurt the father. The son goes off, and he uses all kinds of detail. That he wastes his money, wasteful living, and he's poor and broke. He's alone. He's probably frustrated. He's so at the bottom that he starts to eat the food that the pigs eat. Pig slop. Very, very graphic details. And then he gets to this beautiful, beautiful point in the story where the child says, he comes to his senses and says, I had it so much better than my father. I acted so foolishly. I need to go back to him. And the father, watching, waiting, anticipating, eagerly, desiring his son's return, tearfully welcomes him back without even a word and says, I welcome you back before you even came. That is so much more powerful, such a more effective way of making that point than simply saying, God loves you and will welcome you back. Don't be afraid to use illustrations. When it comes to kids, I want to introduce you to a couple things. My little friend here. Thank you, Pinterest, I guess. When you're teaching the little kids' classes, illustrations, whatever this guy is, he's got googly eyes, looks like some desert wanderer. I don't know exactly what the point was, and your kids might not always remember the point in the class. Sometimes they will. Kids don't remember a lot. But every now and then they'll remember something. Whatever this was used for, it helped teach a point. And for a kid, this was probably a good way to relate, a good illustration to relate to the story. Now let me show you another example. This is something I did in the Bible class when I was little. I keep it on my desk. What was the text we studied this morning? Matthew chapter 6. Seek first the kingdom of God. We were given a jar, mostly full of rice, and then handed some golf balls and told, put the golf balls in there with the rice. And we couldn't fit them all in, trying to force them down through the rice. So we figured out, if you dump the rice out, put the golf balls in first, and then kind of shake it, you can fit in a whole bunch more rice. The point was, the golf balls represent the kingdom of God. Things you need to seek first. Prayer needs to be something you prioritize in your life. The Word of God needs to be something you prioritize in your life. Helping others, so on and so forth. When you put the big things, when you prioritize what matters most in your life, the rest of it will find a way to fit in. When you emphasize and prioritize the small things, you can't fit everything that's supposed to count. I did this when I was like, 10 years old. I still keep this as a reminder about doing the things that matter most, prioritizing God first in my life. It was a simple little illustration. It had a pretty profound impact on my life. So keep that in mind. When you're teaching the young kids, illustrations can be very helpful. You don't always know what kind of impact it's going to have. But I guarantee you, if you keep at it, these kids will remember something. They'll remember some of those things they were taught at an early age. So if you want to be an effective teacher, if you want to teach like Jesus, then use lots of stories and illustrations from everyday life that will help bring meaning or added meaning to the lesson. And finally, repetition. In Mark, there's a number of times. Mark chapter 8, verse 31. Mark chapter 9, verse 31. Mark chapter 10, verse 33. 3 chapters in a row. Jesus says, I'm about to suffer and die and be raised again on the third day. And every time the disciples were like, what? They didn't get it. Jesus spoke of his death and resurrection over and over and over again, and the disciples still didn't get it. But repetition can be important. I think all that repetition was important when the day of Pentecost came in Acts chapter 2, that they finally kind of had that aha moment. Okay, now I get it. But Jesus had to be repetitious. For the younger children, we might think that, the songs that we sing, we might want to skip over some of that and things like that, but that can be very important. Song is a very important tool to remember things. Repetition is very important to remember things. It's through song that I first learned to memorize the books of the Bible. Again, what we're trying to do with children is teach foundational information, things like the books of the Bible, basic concepts like Jesus loves me, remembering who the 12 apostles were, the Old Testament, New Testament, why they're different. I mean, some basic truths. A lot of that can be through repetition and things as simple as singing songs. And I want to suggest one thing before we conclude this lesson. Let's not be afraid of memory verses. Songs can be very effective for young kids, but sometimes we get to like teenage years, we think memory verse, that's for little kids. No, it's not. Deuteronomy chapter 11 and verse 18. Deuteronomy chapter 11 and verse 18, it tells us we need to take this word and put it in here. You shall therefore impress these words of mine on your heart and on your soul. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as freckles on your forehead. You read that verse and tell me memorizing the Bible isn't important. Let's not be afraid of some of these tools that might seem repetitious, but repetition can be good if used properly. So let's keep in mind some of these tools that can help us. You need to know your material. You need to be Bible student. You need to know your class. What age are you teaching? And let's not be afraid to use some examples. Be a little bit hands-on. Ask the right questions to stimulate some thought. Use illustrations and at times even be repetitious. If a point is worth making, it's worth making again. Let's not be monotonous and wear them out, but let's be a little bit repetitious. As we conclude, I want to say a word to parents. The ultimate task of raising children is on your shoulders. That's probably the greatest flaw I see with this youth group program. All my friends in high school that went to youth group, I didn't teach them about the Bible. What we do as Bible teachers here on Sunday, on Wednesdays, is just a small part. It's just a complement to what parents should be doing in home. Ephesians 6 and verse 4. Parents, fathers, mothers, you have a responsibility to raise up your children. As Bible class teachers, it's a great honor, and it's a serious job. We need to think about what we're doing, what we're saying, and how we are impacting these young lives. But parents, let's make sure that our kids are learning the Bible at home. That when they're given assignments to read parts of the Bible for Sunday, where they're helping them, preparing them. What we're doing at home is the most important thing. So I want to invite you to take out your songbooks, or because we're going to sing up on screen, number 8, Under the Great Physician. Certainly, the invitation is offered to you this morning to obey the gospel. If you've never obeyed the gospel in baptism, or if you have, if you desire to make your life right, if there's any way we can help with that, please come forward now as we stand and sing.